as we're moving on, one of the things that is really important to understand is that language shapes how we think. Okay, this is really important to understand. Shaping our way of thought, our way of life, is based on language. Everything that we believe, everything that we think is possible, the different concepts or different ways of looking at life, all of it is based on language. Okay, and what words we have available to convey those concepts, those ideas. Okay, language shapes our culture. Our thoughts determine our reality. Okay, so different cultures are going to have different ways of looking at life, looking at the world, compared to how our culture is, based strictly on our language and what we find important within our language. So, now how does this work? A lot of this, we've sort of talked a little bit about this in when we were talking about culture a couple of weeks ago. Geography can have a big impact, right? If we go back to an example like here in Colorado and maybe specifically Denver, about how we can talk about what's important to Coloradans. We talk about the Front Range, right? If we talk about the hitting the slopes, hitting some POW, the western slope. We have all of these slang words that are indicative to our local community, our local culture, which other folks coming from out of the state aren't necessarily going to be able to recognize. So that also helps us shape sort of our idealism in Colorado. It's one of the reasons why, as a state, we're one of the healthiest states. We're one of the most active states when it comes to outdoor activities, you know, going up skiing and snowboarding and hiking and doing all that fun stuff, going out fishing and hunting. And Colorado is a massively outdoor activity-based state. And our language is representative of that. So it's a really important thing to keep in mind when we're thinking about this. Okay, so one of the things that I really like to kind of consider is what the Western Apache do when it comes to language and using geographical locations to convey stories and moral ideas. And as an example, you might have some folks that are sitting around and they'll be conveying a story about somebody in their group, a family member. And as they're talking about this person, somebody will mention, oh yeah, you know, they're associated with, you know, that stream up in the woods that's got 2 boulders and a rattlesnake. Right? Well, what kind of information can you convey from that? Well, here's the thing. Up this stream that's up in the woods with these 2 boulders and a rattlesnake, somebody had this experience. They went up there, and as they were, let's say, climbing around these 2 boulders, they got bit by a rattlesnake and then fell into the stream, and you know, might have had a really interesting experience, or then maybe they got startled by the rattlesnake and fell into a stream, or you know, whatever. Right? So this story then gets transmitted to the community, and the community says, oh, well, this is a great story to convey that say caution, right? That this is a cautionary tale, that this person walking around these two boulders, they got scared by this rattlesnake and then fell into the river. That's something to be concerned about. So maybe when they're talking amongst their peers and they say, oh, Jim over here, he, should be really concerned about, this happening because of, these two boulders in this stream. All of a sudden, everybody knows that story, and they know the moral behind that story. You don't have to explain the story. You don't have to explain what happens. They just give the location. And that location provides all of that information. English language does the same thing. There are some times that all we have to do is mention the location of something, and we know the story that's behind it. For example, like Gettysburg, right? If you mention Gettysburg, we don't think about it in a contemporary idea. We think about it as a location during the Civil War and the Battle of Gettysburg and what it meant. And it gives us that sort of information. So stuff like communicating in this manner isn't exclusive to, say, like the Western Apache. But for them, they use it a lot more than how we would. A lot of times, we have very few locations that mean something specific. There was a specific thing that happened there and has a tale to it. So it's an interesting way of conveying this information. We also have to know that language itself is very fluid. Okay, it is constantly changing, constantly adapting, and is reflecting new ideas. So as we develop language, as we develop our culture, we change how it looks, how things are portrayed, how we convey morals and these different stories. If we look at focal vocabulary is really important to understand as an anthropologist, because it helps us to sort of understand what's important to that culture. What are the things that are indicative to that culture? What are the things that people believe in and really try and adhere to these ideas and goals? For example, we've talked about the Inuit and their 40 words for snow. Okay, they have 40 different words for snow. And what does that mean? Well, we as Americans, we probably have about, I think, 8 to 12 words for snow, different ways of describing that snow, and what the cautionary issues with that snow could be, right? But if you're Inuit and you're out there and you're like, this is something that my life depends on. I need to be able to identify each type of snow, and we can see all these different things. It makes us capable of surviving in that environment as we create complexity. So having that ability to increase the vocabulary. If we look at car culture in the United States, we have so many variations of the word car, right? It's not just car. Cars is the broad thing, right? Cars include trucks, right? Trucks are a subgroup of car. But there's lots of different types of trucks. There's big trucks, little trucks, semi-trucks. There's half tons, 1 tons, dualies, and then you've got roadsters and hot, I was going to say Hot Wheels, but I have lots of little Hot Wheels, hot rods, and you've got sports cars, and and supercars and rat rods, right? All of these different things that convey these different styles and different types. You've got hoopties and you've got junkers and all of these different ways of explaining cars, right? And how important they are. We have classics, right? We have luxury, right? And when we say those words in combination to that meaning behind that the concept of cars, they can have a lot of different implications. So if I'm talking about a luxury car, right? Who has luxury cars, right? Well, usually rich people, right? People who have money can afford to have a luxury car. So, you know, we have a tendency to focus on these things. Computer technology, right? As computers have developed over the last 20, 30 years, we've seen massive changes in computer culture. I remember as a kid having a computer in a school. It was like an Apple IIe. I don't know if any of you remember what an Apple IIe is. This was before the Apple computers and the iPads and iPods and all that stuff. The Apple IIe, it was a Macintosh, and you had these big floppy drives, right? These big floppy disks that you could stick in, and you know they had like 212 bits of information, right? Compared to now, I mean, my laptop, you know, could have powered more than what computers, you know, 20, 30 years ago could have done with whole rooms of computers. Because we've developed this technology, right, we have changed its importance. And so now we have different terms that become associated with computers and technology. And we talk about screen time, right? Screen time 20, 30 years ago would have been something very, very different. In fact, I don't think I've ever heard of screen time 30 years ago. If I would have said screen time 30 years ago, I would have thought about going up to a window and opening it up and having, you know, time to look out the window with the screen preventing bugs from coming into the house. I don't know, you know, but we didn't have screen time. But we had to develop this concept of screen time because as computers have become such a massive part of our lives, we've had to adjust. Right? We've had to adjust how we reflect, right? And how much screen time do you have a day? Right? The average American spends like 5.5 hours a day in front of a screen, whether it's a TV or a computer or a tablet or their phone, right? All of these things are considered to be a part of screen time. So it can be a lot, right? But we've had to create these new terms to show, right, what's important to our culture and why. So we end up in different languages focusing on these different concepts that tell us as anthropologists what's important to that community. So one of the things that we can do as anthropologists is we look at language within a culture and how it changes due to who is using it. What does that mean? Well, essentially, as people adopt language, they adopt it for themselves. They adopt it for, you know, what they find to be important to that culture. So we look at, let's say, the tech culture, tech communities, and how as more and more people got into technology, they had to create a terminology to move forward in their culture and to be able to become more descriptive and better at their jobs. So it helps to indicate how change can be made. If we go back and look at computers from the 60s and 70s, okay, because we did have computers back then, but they were funny machines. They were punch card machines. They were one computer would oftentimes be at like a bank, and it would take up an entire room. The entire room was one computer, and you could run programs based off of punched like paper cards, and you'd have a whole bunch of these cards in a stack, and you'd put them into the computer, and based off of that, the computer could process whatever it was. We're talking about, just insanely simple processes. I remember hearing stories from my parents who would actually, when they were in school, they would call into the bank to see if they could run one of these programs. And I'm sitting there going like, wow, my watch, I don't have a watch on right now, but my Apple Watch can run a whole bunch of different programs, right? If we look back in time and look at how their language was associated with the technology at the time and how it has changed and adapted to what we have now, we can see how it's progressed and what needed to change to make it what it is today. And so we understand that. One of the other things that we understand with languages as well is how it adapts to different people at different stages in their life, how it can be an aspect of power. So if we look at, say, like age, right, age groups, when you've got like who has power, who has control within gender-related issues, with socioeconomic, with sexuality and class, right? We look at language to see how do we describe these different things and how is language being used by these different groups. So, if you've ever had conversations with your grandparents, their way of speaking might seem kind of different to how you speak, right? To the things that you find important, to the way that they pronounce different words, might have changed over time, and to where you are now, it might be very, very different. It can be different by gender. Gender can have a big impact on how people speak, and we'll be getting into this quite a bit here in a little bit. Socioeconomic standing, right? A lot of times, the wealthy have different access to different schools and have different access to education, where if you're on the low end of the socioeconomic group, if you're low income, then you might not have access to that, and you might have different ways of expressing that information. So that can be indicative of your socioeconomic standing. So language can definitely be a way of allowing us to see where people are coming from. We might be speaking the same language, right? We might all be speaking English, but how English is spoken can indicate who you are, what your age is, what your socioeconomic standing is, what your education level is. So all of these things can be indicative of that, and how people can use language to control. So if we look at language, we also have to understand that words have the ability to have power, right? They have the power to do good and to do bad. They can heal. They can cause harm. Words have historical value. Words can change meaning over time. And these are all important things to understand. Words can be used as a tool, and they can also be used as a weapon. So if we're talking about different words that have changed over time, one thing we might say is the word or the term gay. Okay, so if we look at the word gay, what did it mean 100 years ago? Well, the word gay used to be about happy, right? It was a way of being happy. And if you listen to like old songs and old music, sometimes you'll hear that term, and you'll be like, wait, what does that actually mean, right? Well, the term gay has changed over time. It has picked up a new meaning, and it has changed from being a descriptor of an emotion to a descriptor of a lifestyle and to a person that has a different sexual orientation. So these words can have can start out one direction and have something else completely within decades. We can also talk about like the N-word, right? The N-word, which I won't use because if, as a white guy, I say it, it means something very specific. And it is a derogatory term, right? And there's a lot of debate about this. But I think some folks will say that, we shouldn't use that word because it's derogatory and it means all of this negativity and all of this stuff. And personally, I, for the most part, agree. At the same time, if you are black and you use that terminology as a part of that aspect of language, right? If you use it and it doesn't have that negative connotation to it, right? There's at this point, we're not, as anthropologists, we're not making, again, judgment calls. It's about understanding how language is being used, right? We understand that, as with white supremacy and racism and all of this stuff, how this word can be used in a very specific way to have a negative connotation to it. But at the same time, we also know that as a word within the community, it can be different and be used differently in a way that isn't negative. So understanding how words and language can be adopted to mean different things, to have a different connotation to it is really important to understand, and how people are going to react when they hear certain terminology being used, and what it means to be that person, either using it or having it used against them. So, and we'll be discussing this later when we get into race and racism and stuff like that. Language is really, really important to understand how information is conveyed. And a lot of what we're seeing in our current political landscape is that the language that's being used isn't necessarily meaning the same to different people. And I think this is really important to sort of to understand, is that as a community, we grow up in different areas, and we have different experiences. And when somebody and I'll use this as an example. So recently with all of the protests and stuff going on with Black Lives Matters and then the response, like the Blue Lives Matters, and then from there we had like the defund the police, right? So there are a lot of people out there that I know personally, and this is my personal experience here, that when they hear like defund the police, they get really upset. They get pissed off. They're like, why should the police have to suffer for somebody that's doing something wrong, right? They shouldn't be doing something wrong. Police are there to protect us. And the thing that I always try and remind them of is the fact that, you probably grew up in the suburbs of some big city where you never had a single bad run-in with a cop, right? You had this privilege of not having to deal with bad cops. And so your concept of of police brutality and stuff, you think it's minimalized or it's localized to a certain group, and we shouldn't defund all cops, right? Especially not your good cops in your neighborhood that you've never had any problems with. A lot of people have this concept that this is this personal reflection to the defund the police, and so they don't conceptualize that there's a larger thing going on here. So the concept of why it's important to change, why people believe you should defund the police is important, doesn't come across, right? Because of their experience without ever having to need to defund the police, right? They don't have any issues. So conveying why has become a major complication. People get upset and they're saying like the police are doing this, and they're over here they're like the police aren't doing that because it's not happening to us. And so there is a cause for miscommunication, right? So, and just on my own personal commentary here, the thing that we have to try and do as personally as an anthropologist, and just people in general, I think it's all about creating that civil discourse. It's kind of like at the beginning of the semester when I sort of gave like the disclaimer for this class that this is a venue for civil discourse, that we might be talking about various things throughout the semester that can be an issue. Well, this is one of those issues that's going to pop up, and that we have to look at as anthropologists, as researchers, as social scientists. We have to look at, why is this important? Why are we looking at all of this and seeing all these difficult things that are being discussed, and people on both sides are getting upset? Why is that? Right? What is the experience on both sides? And why is there a lack of translation between? And so as anthropologists, it's not necessarily our job to tell one group of people why they're right or why they're wrong. It would be our job to try and understand the point of view of one group or the other, and then to try and sort of interpret what's being said back and forth. That way, both sides can understand where the other is coming from. And that's a big thing when it comes to anthropology, is creating that bridge, understanding the cultural background, understanding the differences in people that are coming from a urban environment to a rural environment, from the suburbs to downtown, right? And how people live differently and yet still have a similar experience, right? We're all Americans, right? We're all Americans, but we don't all go about seeing America the same way. We don't all have the same viewpoints and ideas on culture, and we don't agree on everything. And that's why currently we have such a highly contested culture right now, and why we're in all kinds of political strife and cultural strife. So, yeah, it's a lot to think about. So what I'd like to do right now is we're going to create a discussion on this, and I'm not going to have you break into groups. This will all be individual, but it's going to be the same sort of concept that we've done before. I'm going to have you post these 3 different examples. So I want you to be able to give 3 examples of how someone can use language to instill hope, to instill fear, or to instill change. Okay, so 3 different examples of how language can be used to create these different concepts. Now, honestly, this should be a relatively simple exercise, because if you pay attention to politics, and it's hard not to in days like this, that you can see what these issues might be. Now, as an example, I will use Obama and Trump as examples, and I'll make this a quick example. So Obama uses when he ran for office both times, used this term hope, right? And probably all of you can remember the poster of Obama, and it's this cool red, white, and blue poster, and it's got hope. Hope is spread out along the bottom of it, and it's an example for people to think that there is something better that we could put together, right? So that is a way of describing hope. Okay. Here's another way of describing hope. Make America great again. Right? Well, if you were like a supporter of Obama and heard "Make America Great Again," you might automatically say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, that's Trump, and I don't like Trump." Right? And I would say that is a word for fear, right? Because I don't like Trump. But that terminology and the symbolism behind it is a very similar term to hope. It is instilling hope into people that support President Trump. So it's the same thing as what Obama did with the term hope. This time, President Trump is using "Make America Great Again," right? Because he's recalling a time in history where America was at its greatest, and that somehow we have not been as great, but we can get there again. If we just work hard enough, if we follow this set of guidelines that he is putting forward, that we can make America great again. That is a term of hope. Now, because culture is what it is, right, that terminology can be then turned into something else, right? If you're a Democrat and you hear the term, "Make America Great Again," and you see like the red hats as a symbol for that, you don't see it as hope. You see it as something very different. So these different terms can depend greatly on who's using them, right? And that's the important thing to understand when it comes to language and understanding culture, is that despite your own political views, right, your bias, right? We've been talking about bias and figuring out where our biases come from, and being able to set those aside and say, okay, why is this important? The same can be said for Black Lives Matters and Blue Lives Matters, right? Both of these terms are used to convey that they believe that this group of people is important and we need to protect them, that we need to instill laws and create social change that will allow each of these groups to do better, right? That we need to support them. So it all depends on who is using that terminology. It all depends on how that community sees these different concepts. So take a few minutes, think about what you would like to use for these 3 different terms, write them down, and then we will come back in a few minutes and continue on with the lecture. Okay, we'll see you in a few.